Family Mysteries. I don't care who you are or where you are from, every family has them. Everyone who has looked into family history or genealogy has questions and mysteries that can never be answered. And it is that sense of mystery that draws me to East Carter Memory Gardens in Grayson, Kentucky. Today, we are visiting the gravesite of Chester Rogers. From any and all accounts, Chester Rogers was a wonderful man, a hardworking man, a family man, a pillar in his community, and faithful to his church. Birth date, March 10th. Death date, March 10th. Passing on his 85th birthday in 1999, almost as a perfectly written story, with the final chapter closing on the same month and day as the first chapter began. Family mysteries. Some mysteries are not of your own making. Some are left behind for you to untangle and to figure out on your own. Chester was born in 1914 to Oscar and Jenny Rogers. Sadly, Jenny would pass in 1918 when Chester was but a boy. It was told by him that he carried no memories of her, a source of pain for him throughout his life. Chester's first appearance in the census would be in the census of 1920. Living in Carter County, Kentucky, where he was born. His father Oscar was remarried by this time, and he was living with his father Oscar and stepmother Annie, and he was the youngest child living in the household except for younger brother Edgar, who was still a baby at the time. By the time the 1930 census was taken, Chester was 15 and some more younger siblings had joined the family. Everything seemed pretty normal. The records were not anything out of the ordinary for the time, and Chester was becoming a man, about to start a family of his own. If you check the census records in northeast Kentucky during this time, you'll see that nearly all men were listed as farmers for their occupation, and if anybody wanted to make some actual life-enhancing money, you had to leave the area. There just wasn't a whole lot of enterprise. So Chester, along with his new bride Geneva Blevins, did just that. And by the time that the 1940 census was taken, Chester, along with his wife Geneva, were living in Cabin Creek, West Virginia, with their two young daughters Vivian Charlene and Phyllis June. He had went to work in the dangerous West Virginia coal mines. Yes, it was an improvement in life quality, but an extremely dangerous occupation in which premature death was the norm, and you truly didn't know if you were coming home to your family that night or not. It was around this time that Chester would be required to register for the World War II draft. Family mysteries. Everybody has them. This record brings us to the first inconsistency. If you notice on Chester Rogers' gravestone, his birth year is listed as 1914. On the draft record, it's 1915. I know it's a small difference and perhaps a clerical error, but nonetheless, it's inconsistent. Chester and family would move back to Kentucky, and by the time the 1950 census was taken, a few more children were added to the family. Chester Dean, Clyde, Charles, and Carolyn Sue, who was just a baby at the time. Chester would run a small filling station and would eventually land a job at General Refractories in neighboring Hitchens, Kentucky, a brick manufacturer, and to this day it is still referred to as the Brickyard. Chester worked hard, he provided, he was a family man, and the time had come to finally retire. He had done everything he was supposed to do. Chester had lived for his family, his kids and grandkids, so for Chester Rogers it must have been a shock when he went to file for his retirement to learn that according to the state of Kentucky, Chester Rogers didn't exist. This brings up a whole new set of questions. When I searched for the birth record of Chester Rogers from 1914, one did not exist. I did, however, find a record of a birth in which Chester's mother had a date of 4/24/1978 listed between her first and last name. It was definitely not a standard Kentucky birth index record. This one had to have been added later, added on the date listed between Jenny's first and last name, the date that would have coincided with the time that Chester would have tried to retire. So the only birth record associated with Chester Rogers was added in 1978 now brings the big question: why? Why is there no birth record? What could have possibly happened to bring this about? A big-time clue would come from the retirement process, and one that can actually be backed up with records. A record would be found of Chester's brother, James W., born just a year after Chester. Here's the problem with that. Chester had no brother named James, and no records of James exist after his initial birth record. April 15th, 1915, along with the name, albeit misspelled, of Chester's mother, Jenny Rogers. That's it. Just think about it. There is a birth record for James and no records afterwards for him. There is no birth record for Chester, but records after that. Chester didn't have a brother named James. Chester was James. Remember, Chester's mother, Jenny, died when he was very small, and there was a period of a few years in his young life where huge changes were made. The reason why the name was changed is unclear. A few theories: it could have been a nickname that just stuck, or the new stepmother who took over the motherly duties when he was small may have changed it. Who knows on that? The man known as Chester Rogers his whole life, 85 years, was born as James W., and he may have been off a year on his birth. I mentioned at the beginning of the video that his life seemed to be a storybook, birthday and death day on the same day. It seems that the storybook had more unknown chapters and mystery than originally thought. A few thoughts. Chester Rogers did indeed pass away on March 10th, 1999. Chester and Geneva Rogers had 7 children: Charlene, June, Dean, Charlie, Clyde, Sue, and Mike. Geneva followed Chester 15 years later in 2014. Dean would pass away at a young age, and at the time of this video, the rest are still with us. He had a multitude of grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and by now great-great-grandchildren, including myself, as he was my great-grandfather. For more cemetery videos and history content, please subscribe and join me. Once again, from East Carter Memory Gardens in Grayson, Kentucky, I will see you again soon.